Good evening, weary soul. Welcome back to the Whispers of Time channel. I'm so happy you found your way here once again, to this small sanctuary where the noise of the modern world fades away and something older, quieter, deeper takes its place. Perhaps your mind has been racing all day. Perhaps you've been carrying burdens that feel too heavy for your shoulders. Perhaps you simply need to disappear for a while into someone else's life, someone else's time, where your worries cannot follow because they haven't been invented yet. Tonight, we're taking a different path than before. We're not entering workshops filled with delicate crafts or fragrant essences. Tonight, we're going to the source, to the foundation, to the very backbone of ancient Egyptian civilization. We're stepping into the sun-baked fields beside the Nile, into the mud between your toes, into the rhythm of planting and harvesting that has sustained humanity since the very beginning of settled life. We're going to live, for these next drowsy hours, as an ancient Egyptian farmer, not a pharaoh draped in gold, not a priest chanting in shadowed temples, not a scribe with inked fingers recording history. Just an ordinary person doing extraordinary work, the kind of work that feeds empires, that makes pyramids possible, that allows civilization itself to exist. The farmer who wakes before the sun every single morning, who knows the Nile's moods better than any scholar, who can read the sky and the soil with an expertise that comes not from books, but from generations of accumulated wisdom passed down through calloused hands and patient instruction. This is a life of rhythm and repetition, of cycles that mirror the cosmos itself. The flood comes, the flood recedes. The seeds are planted, the crops grow, the harvest arrives, and then the whole beautiful, exhausting cycle begins again. Year after year after year, for thousands of years, stretching backward into the mists of time and forward into futures we cannot imagine. The farmer's work is as eternal as the Nile itself, as necessary as breathing, as sacred as any temple ritual, because without this work, without these people, there is no Egypt, no civilization, no art or architecture or philosophy, or anything else we admire from that distant golden age. So let your breathing slow now. Let your body settle deeper into whatever supports you. You don't need to do anything tonight except listen and drift. Let the words carry you backward through the centuries, through the millennia, to a time when life was harder in many ways, but simpler in others, when your place in the world was clear, when the work of your hands fed your family and your community, when you could see directly the results of your labor transforming from seed to grain, to bread, to life itself. Before we begin our journey to the fields, if this is the kind of peace you've been searching for, if you want to ensure we meet again tomorrow night with another story to ease you into sleep, please take just one moment now, while you still can, to tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'll be here waiting for you tomorrow evening. Same gentle voice, same quiet refuge from the chaos. Most people drift off within the first few minutes, so do it now while your eyes are still open, while you can still remember to move your hand. One small tap, and I promise I'll guide you somewhere peaceful tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night you need to escape into the past. Now then, close your eyes if they're not closed already. Feel the weight of your body. Feel yourself sinking, softening, releasing. And let's begin our journey to ancient Egypt, to the village beside the Nile, to the life of the farmer who is just now waking in the darkness before dawn, ready to begin another day of the sacred work that has sustained humanity since we first learned to coax life from the earth. The farmer wakes in darkness, in the hour when the world is suspended between night and day, when the stars are still visible but beginning to fade, when the air is finally cool after yesterday's relentless heat. This is the best hour, the gift of morning, the brief respite before the sun climbs high and turns the valley into a furnace. The farmer has learned to love this hour, to savor these moments of coolness and quiet before the day's hard work begins. The house is small, made of mud bricks that were formed from the Nile's clay, mixed with straw and dried in the sun that dries everything. That preserves everything in this land where rain almost never falls. The walls are thick, which helps keep the interior cool during the day and warm during the surprisingly cold nights of winter. The roof is flat, made of palm fronds and reed mats laid across wooden beams, and the family sometimes sleeps there during the hottest months, under the vast canopy of stars that seem close enough to touch. Farmer rises from the reed sleeping mat carefully, quietly, trying not to wake the wife and children who are still breathing the deep, slow breaths of sleep. The floor is hard-packed earth, cool against bare feet, smooth from years of walking. The house has only 3 rooms, one for sleeping, one for storage where grain is kept in large clay jars sealed against mice and insects, and one open area that serves as kitchen and living space, with a clay oven for baking bread and a few simple stools for sitting. This is not poverty, not here, not in this village of farmers who work the richest land in the known world. This is simply how people live, modestly, practically, with everything they need and nothing they don't. The farmer's family is not wealthy, will never be wealthy in the way that merchants or officials are wealthy, but they eat well, they have shelter, they have each other, and they have work that matters. What more could anyone truly need? The farmer steps outside into the pre-dawn darkness and breathes deeply, tasting the air, reading it like a scribe reads papyrus. There is moisture in the air, the eternal gift of the Nile that keeps this narrow strip of land green and alive, while the desert sprawls endlessly on either side, waiting to reclaim everything the moment human attention falters. The farmer can smell the river, that distinctive scent of water and mud and growing things, the smell that means life, that means possibility, that means Egypt itself. The morning ritual begins with washing, scooping water from a large clay jar that was filled yesterday from the irrigation canal, splashing it over face and hands and feet, waking the body gently, preparing it for the long day ahead. The water is cool, almost cold, and it sharpens the senses, brings full wakefulness in a way that is both shock and pleasure. The farmer dries with a piece of linen, coarse and rough, woven by the wife during the flood season when there is less field work to do. Next comes prayer, quiet words spoken to the gods who make everything possible. A prayer to Ra, who will soon emerge from the eastern horizon and begin his daily journey across the sky, bringing light and warmth and the power that makes crops grow. A prayer to Happy, the god of the Nile, whose annual flood determines whether the coming year will bring abundance or famine, life or death. A prayer to Osiris, god of agriculture and resurrection, who taught humans the art of farming in the distant mythical past, who understands the mysteries of seeds dying in the earth and being reborn as green shoots reaching toward the sun. These prayers are not elaborate or theatrical. They are simple, sincere, the conversation of someone who knows the gods are real because their effects are visible every single day in the rising sun and the flowing river and the grain that grows from scattered seeds. The farmer does not doubt the gods any more than doubting that water is wet or fire is hot. They are simply there, part of the fabric of reality, deserving of respect and gratitude and regular offerings of bread and beer. And whatever else can be spared from the family's portion. As the sky begins to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue to the pale color of desert sand, the farmer's wife rises and begins to prepare the morning meal. There is no time for anything elaborate, just simple food to give energy for the work ahead. Bread that was baked yesterday, coarse and dark, made from emmer wheat ground on a stone quern that wears down the flour and fills it with tiny particles of stone that gradually wear down everyone's teeth, so that by middle age most people's teeth are ground nearly flat, and eating becomes a challenge that contributes to the feeling of age and decline. With the bread, there is beer, not the beer of later civilizations, but something thick and nutritious, made from partially baked barley bread that is crumbled into water and allowed to ferment, creating a cloudy beverage that is more food than drink, full of calories and nutrients that will sustain the body through hours of hard labor. The taste is slightly sour, slightly sweet, filling, and satisfying. The children drink beer too, though a weaker version, because the fermentation makes it safer than water that might carry disease. There might also be an onion, raw and sharp, eaten whole like an apple, providing flavor and nutrients. Onions are everywhere in Egypt, cheap and abundant, growing easily in the rich soil. The farmer loves onions, has eaten them every day for so many years that a meal without one feels incomplete, unsatisfying. Sometimes there are dates, wrinkled and intensely sweet, or figs when they're in season. But this morning there are none, and that's fine. There will be other mornings, other seasons. The wheel of the year turning endlessly and bringing everything in its proper time. The farmer eats quickly, standing outside the house, watching the sky grow lighter, listening to the village waking around this small home. A dog barks somewhere. A baby cries and is soothed. Someone is singing, a wordless melody that carries the sense of morning, of beginning, of another day unfolding with all its challenges and possibilities. Smoke begins to rise from cooking fires, thin gray columns reaching toward the sky that is now definitely blue, definitely day. The stars completely faded, and the sun about to make its dramatic appearance over the eastern desert. It's time to go to the fields. The farmer picks up the tools that will be needed today. A hoe with a wooden handle and a bronze blade, a basket woven from reeds, a water skin made from a goat's stomach, sewn closed and waterproofed. The wife and the 2 oldest children will come later, after the household tasks are done, after the younger children are settled with grandmother, who lives 3 houses away, and who watches all the village's small ones while their parents work in the fields. The path to the fields is well worn, a track of packed earth that winds between the mud brick houses of the village, past the potter's workshop and the bread oven shared by several families, past the small shrine where offerings are left for the local gods, past the place where the village's few animals are penned at night, goats and sheep, and the precious oxen that pull the plow during planting season. The farmer greets the neighbors who are also heading to their fields, and there are nods and brief words, the companionship of people who share the same work, the same challenges, the same ultimate dependence on the Nile's generosity and the gods' favor. The fields begin where the village ends, spreading out in a patchwork of plots divided by low mud walls and irrigation canals, stretching toward the river in one direction and toward the desert in the other. In the growing light of dawn, they are beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful, green and lush, and full of life. The barley is nearly ready for harvest, standing tall and golden, the seed heads heavy and full. The emmer wheat is a few weeks behind, still green but growing well. The flax plants are flowering. Their delicate blue blossoms, like pieces of sky, fall into earth. And in a few weeks, they'll be pulled up and processed into linen thread that the wife will weave into cloth. The farmer walks to the family's plot, about 3 aruras of land, roughly 2 acres, not a huge amount, but enough to feed the family, and provide surplus to pay the taxes that are the price of living under Pharaoh's protection. This land has been worked by the farmer's family for generations, passed down from father to son in an unbroken line that stretches back further than anyone can remember or count. The farmer knows every inch of this plot, knows where the soil is richest and where it is thinner, knows which areas tend to hold water and which dry out quickly, knows where weeds grow thickest and where the mice make their nests. The first task this morning is to check the irrigation, to make sure water is flowing properly from the canal that connects to the river. The farmer walks along the small channel that feeds water to this plot, looking for blockages, for places where the sides have collapsed, for evidence of someone upstream taking more than their fair share of the precious flow. Water is life here. Water is everything. And the management of water is both a practical necessity and a source of constant low-level conflict between neighbors who all need the same resource and who all believe, with perfect sincerity, that their own need is greatest and most urgent. Today, the water is flowing well, clear and steady, and the farmer feels a quiet gratitude that requires no words. The small dam of mud that controls the flow into this particular plot is adjusted slightly, redirecting a bit more water toward the barley that will be harvested soon and needs one more good soaking to fill out the grains completely. The farmer uses the hoe to clear away some silt that has accumulated at the edge of the canal, tossing it onto the field where it will enrich the soil, keeping the channel clear and deep so water can flow freely. This work is meditative, repetitive, requiring attention, but not intense concentration, allowing the mind to wander while the hands do their familiar work. The farmer thinks about the coming harvest, trying to estimate the yield, trying to calculate whether there will be enough to pay the tax collectors and still have surplus to trade for the things the family needs. Oil for lamps, salt for preserving food, new sandals because the old ones are wearing through, perhaps a copper bracelet for the wife who has been wanting one for months, who never complains, but whose eyes linger on such things when they go to the market. The sun breaks over the horizon suddenly, dramatically, as it always does in Egypt, where the eastern desert provides a perfectly flat line for the solar drama to unfold against. The light is golden and pure, and for a moment, the farmer stops working and simply watches, feeling the first warmth on skin, seeing the way the light transforms the fields into something that glows from within, something that looks almost holy, almost like the God's own garden. This is why the farmer loves this work, loves this life, despite its hardships and uncertainties. This beauty, this connection to the land and the river and the cycles of nature, this feeling of being part of something vast and eternal and meaningful. But there's no time for prolonged contemplation. The sun's appearance means the serious work must begin before the heat becomes too intense. The farmer moves through the barley, inspecting the crop carefully, looking for signs of disease or insect damage, checking that the seed heads are developing properly. The barley looks good this year, healthy and strong, and unless something catastrophic happens in the next few weeks, the harvest should be abundant. The farmer makes a mental note to offer extra bread at the shrine tomorrow, a small thank you to the gods for their favor. The wife and the two older children arrive as the sun climbs higher, and the farmer greets them with a smile and a nod. The children are carrying more tools and a basket with more bread and onions for the midday meal. They're young but strong, already experienced in field work, already understanding that the family's survival depends on everyone contributing what they can. The oldest, a boy of 12, is nearly as skilled as the farmer himself, able to manage the oxen during plowing, able to read the soil and the weather, already learning the accumulated wisdom that will make him a farmer in his own right someday. The wife begins weeding between the rows of wheat, pulling up the wild plants that compete with the crop for water and nutrients. This is endless work, work that is never truly finished because weeds grow constantly, relentlessly, taking advantage of the same rich soil and irrigation water that makes the crops flourish. But the wife is patient and thorough, moving methodically through the field, her hands quick and sure, pulling weeds and tossing them aside to wither in the sun. She hums as she works, the same melody the farmer heard earlier in the village, and the sound is comforting, familiar, a reminder that this hard work is shared, that no one labors alone. The children have their own tasks. The boy helps his father with the heavier work of clearing a clogged section of irrigation canal, using a wooden shovel to scoop out mud and debris. The girl, who is 10, walks through the barley field with a sling, watching for birds that might try to eat the ripening grain. She's good at this, patient and observant. And when she spots a flock of sparrows descending toward the field, she whirls the sling and launches a stone that clatters through the barley stalks. And the birds scatter in alarm, wheeling away toward someone else's field, someone else's problem. The morning passes in this rhythm of steady work, each person focused on their task, occasionally exchanging brief words, but mostly working in comfortable silence. The sun climbs higher, the heat builds, sweat begins to flow freely, soaking through the simple linen kilts and dresses that everyone wears. The farmer pauses periodically to drink from the water skin, the water warm now, but still refreshing, still necessary, and offers drinks to the wife and children as well. Dehydration is a real danger during the hot months, and everyone in the village knows stories of people who ignored their thirst and collapsed in the fields, sometimes never recovering. Around midday, when the sun is directly overhead and the heat is truly intense, the family retreats to the narrow strip of shade provided by a few date palms growing at the edge of the field. This is the time for the main meal of the day, the time to rest and restore energy for the afternoon's work. They sit on the ground in a small circle, passing around the basket of food, more bread, more onions, and today there are some lentils that the wife cooked last night. Cold now, but still good, filling and nourishing. The children talk about things they've seen in the fields. A snake sunning itself on a rock, a nest of baby mice that the girl almost stepped on, the strange cloud formation that appeared briefly in the west before dissolving. The farmer listens and occasionally comments, teaching them to read the natural signs, to understand the language of the land and sky and river. That cloud might mean nothing, or it might mean rain is falling somewhere far to the south in the highlands where the Nile is born. Rain that will eventually swell the river's flow and contribute to the annual flood that is still months away, but that is always present in the farmer's mind, always being anticipated and prepared for. The wife mentions that the neighbor's wife is pregnant again, her seventh child, and everyone hopes this one survives because the last two did not, dying in infancy from fever and other mysterious illnesses that afflict children despite all prayers and offerings and careful attention. Life is fragile here, and death is always close, always waiting for a moment of inattention or bad luck or the inexplicable will of the gods. But life is also strong, always pushing forward, always renewing itself, and the village celebrates every birth with genuine joy, because children are wealth, children are security, children are the ones who will work the fields when the current generation grows old and weak. After eating, they rest for a while, lying in the shade, conserving energy. The farmer closes his eyes, but doesn't really sleep, just enters a kind of waking dream state where consciousness floats without purpose or direction, where the body repairs itself and gathers strength for the work that still remains. The sound of the breeze moving through the palm fronds is soothing, musical, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. The farmer could stay here forever, suspended in this moment between work and rest, between effort and ease. But eventually, the need to continue draws everyone back to their feet, back to their tasks, back to the eternal labor that defines this life. The afternoon work is similar to the mornings. More weeding, more irrigation management, more checking the crops for problems. The farmer also spends time repairing a section of the low mud wall that marks the boundary of the family's plot, using mud from the canal and a wooden paddle to build up the wall that has eroded in places. These walls are important, not just for marking property, but for controlling water flow, for creating the basins that hold irrigation water long enough for it to soak deep into the soil. As the farmer works, the mind drifts to thoughts of the coming harvest season, the busy, intense weeks when the entire village will work from dawn to well after dark, cutting grain and thrashing it and winnowing it and storing it, racing against time and weather, and the tax collectors who will arrive to claim Pharaoh's portion. The harvest is both the reward for all this patient labor and the source of tremendous anxiety, because everything depends on those few weeks, and there are so many things that can go wrong. Storms that flatten the grain, locusts that devour everything, thieves who steal from the fields at night, accidents with sickles that leave people injured and unable to work. But those worries are still weeks away, and there's no point in borrowing trouble from the future. The farmer has learned this lesson over many years, has learned to focus on today's work and let tomorrow worry about itself, has learned that anxiety about things that haven't happened yet is wasted energy that could be better used for the actual work that needs doing right now, in this present moment, in this field under this sun, beside this canal that needs constant attention and care. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, and the heat finally starts to ease. This is the farmer's favorite time of the day after the cool morning, when the light turns golden and soft, when shadows grow long across the fields, when the workday is nearly finished and the evening's rest is approaching. The farmer gathers the tools, checking that nothing is left behind, and the family begins the walk back to the village, tired but satisfied, their bodies aching in the good way that comes from honest physical labor. The village is coming alive in the early evening, people returning from their various works, children playing in the narrow spaces between houses, women preparing the evening meal over cooking fires that fill the air with smoke and the smell of bread baking. The farmer's family enters their small house, and there is the wonderful feeling of homecoming, of shelter, of being in the place where you belong. The wife begins preparing the evening meal while the farmer washes again, sluicing away the day's accumulation of sweat and dust, feeling human again, feeling clean. The evening meal is similar to the other meals: bread and beer, onions and lentils. And tonight there are some small fish that the farmer caught yesterday in the canal, grilled over the fire until their skin is crispy and delicious. Fish are not rare here beside the Nile, and they provide valuable protein that meat cannot, because meat requires animals that can be kept only in small numbers. The fish tastes of the river itself, slightly muddy, but good, familiar, satisfying. After eating, the family sits outside in the cooling air, talking quietly about the day, making plans for tomorrow. The children ask their father to tell them a story, and the farmer obliges, telling once again the old tale of how Osiris taught humans to farm, how he showed them how to plant seeds and tend crops and harvest grain, how he was murdered by his jealous brother Set and cut into pieces and scattered across Egypt, how his wife Isis gathered the pieces and brought him back to life, how he became the god of the dead and the judge of souls, and the promise that death is not the end, but a transformation into another form of existence. The children have heard this story many times, but they never tire of it, and the farmer never tires of telling it. These stories are more than entertainment. They are education. They are the transmission of values and beliefs. They are the way a culture perpetuates itself across generations. They are how children learn what it means to be Egyptian, to be part of this particular civilization with its particular gods and customs and ways of understanding the world and humanity's place within it. As darkness falls completely, the family prepares for sleep. The children lie down on their reed mats, and the wife covers them with light linen sheets. The farmer performs one last task before sleeping, stepping outside to look up at the stars that are now visible in their thousands, brilliant and steady in the clear desert air. The farmer finds the familiar constellations, the ones that mark the seasons and help track time's passage, the ones that the ancestors watched, and that the farmer's children's children will watch long after this body has returned to the earth from which it came. Tomorrow will be another day much like today, and the day after that will be the same. And the farmer finds deep comfort in this rhythm, this repetition, this sense that life has a pattern and a purpose. Not everyone needs adventure or variety or constant novelty. Some people, perhaps most people, find meaning in the steady, reliable work of tending the land and feeding their families and participating in the ancient compact between humans and the earth that gives us life. The farmer returns inside, lies down beside the wife on their sleeping mat, and closes eyes that have seen the same sights for so many years that they could probably navigate the fields in complete darkness. Sleep comes easily to those who work hard with their bodies, and within minutes, the farmer is dreaming of green fields and full granaries, dreaming of abundant harvests and healthy children, dreaming the dreams that have sustained agricultural people since the beginning of settled civilization. The seasons turn, as they always turn, marked in Egypt not by temperature changes, but by the Nile's behavior, by the three great seasons that govern everything. First comes Akhet, the flooding season, when the river swells and spreads across the valley, covering the fields with water that deposits fresh silt and renews the soil's fertility. During Akhet, the farmer cannot work the fields, and instead is conscripted for state labor projects, building or repairing temples and monuments and canals, working alongside thousands of other farmers in massive organized efforts that testify to Egypt's administrative sophistication and its ability to mobilize and coordinate vast amounts of human labor. This conscripted labor is not slavery, though it is not entirely voluntary either. It is understood as a tax, a way of paying for the privilege of living under Pharaoh's protection and benefiting from the irrigation systems and granaries and security that the state provides. The farmer does not love this work, finds it tedious and exhausting, but accepts it as necessary, as part of the social contract that allows civilization to function. And there are compensations. The state feeds the workers adequately, and there is a certain satisfaction in being part of something large and important, in moving stones that will stand for thousands of years, in contributing, however modestly, to the eternal glory of Egypt and its divine kings. Then comes Peret, the growing season, when the flood waters recede and leave behind the rich black mud that gives Egypt its ancient name. Kemet, the black land, in contrast to Deseret, the red land of the surrounding desert. This is the busiest time for the farmer, the time when the fields must be plowed and seeds must be sown, when everyday matters and delays can mean the difference between abundance and hunger. The farmer yokes the oxen to the wooden plow, guiding them carefully through the muddy fields, turning the soil so it can receive the seeds. The plow is simple, just a wooden blade attached to a handle and pulled by ropes, but it is effective, breaking up the soil and creating furrows for planting. The oxen are patient and strong, and the farmer treats them well, understands that their health and cooperation are essential to the family's survival. After plowing comes the women and children with baskets of seed, scattering barley and emmer wheat and flax across the prepared fields, broadcasting the precious seeds with practiced motions that ensure even distribution. Then comes the strange and clever practice of driving animals across the fields to trample the seeds into the mud, pressing them down where they'll germinate and grow. Sheep and goats and pigs walk back and forth across the fields in a chaotic ballet that looks random, but that actually ensures good seed coverage and protection from birds that would otherwise eat much of the sowing. The children laugh at this part, delighted by the animals' confusion, and even the adults smile at the sight. At this peculiar but effective technique that has been used in Egypt for countless generations. After planting comes the long wait, the weeks and months of tending the growing crops, of managing irrigation, water, of weeding and protecting against pests, of watching anxiously for signs of disease or drought, or any of the 1,000 things that can threaten a crop between seed and harvest. This is when the farmer's skill and experience matter most, when knowledge accumulated over decades determines success or failure, when the ability to read subtle signs and respond appropriately makes the difference between a good harvest and a disaster. Finally comes Shemu, the harvest season, the culmination of all the year's work, the time when everything depends on speed and efficiency and the cooperation of the entire community. The grain must be cut quickly before it over-ripens and shatters, before storms or pests can damage it, before the tax collectors arrive and assess the crop and claim Pharaoh's portion, which is typically around 20% of the yield, but can be more if the state's needs are urgent. The entire family works during harvest, rising before dawn and working until after dark, cutting grain with bronze sickles that have been carefully sharpened for this intensive work. The farmer cuts the stalks about halfway up, leaving the stubble in the field to be plowed under later, and the wife and children gather the cut grain into sheaves that are tied with twisted straw and carried to the threshing floor, a circular area of hard-packed earth where the grain will be separated from the chaff. Thrashing is done by driving oxen round and round over the piled grain, their hooves breaking open the seed heads and trampling the straw into pieces. This work continues for days, the same circular walking, the same patient repetition, until all the grain has been processed. Then comes winnowing, the work of tossing the mixed grain and chaff into the air with wooden forks, letting the wind blow away the lighter chaff while the heavier seeds fall back to the ground. This requires perfect timing, waiting for the afternoon breeze that comes reliably at certain times of year, and skill in tossing the grain at just the right angle to maximize separation. The farmer's arms ache from this work, and the chaff gets everywhere, in hair and clothes and lungs, making everyone cough and itch. But there is also tremendous satisfaction in watching the pile of clean grain grow, in knowing that this represents security for the coming year, represents the successful completion of another agricultural cycle, represents the continuation of life itself. The clean grain is measured by official scribes who record the amount and calculate the tax owed. The farmer watches this process anxiously, trying to ensure the measuring is fair, the scribes are not corrupt or overly harsh in their assessments. Sometimes disputes arise, and these must be settled by local officials who have the authority to adjust assessments or impose penalties for attempted evasion. The farmer has learned to be honest in these dealings, has learned that attempting to cheat the state brings punishment that far outweighs any short-term gain, has learned that the system generally works if everyone participates honestly, and the officials are not too greedy or cruel. After the tax is paid, the remainder of the grain is stored in large clay jars in the house's storage room, sealed against moisture and pests. Some grain is kept for planting next year's crop. Some will be ground into flour and baked into bread day by day throughout the coming months. Some will be brewed into beer, and some will be traded for other necessities. If the harvest has been particularly good, there might even be surplus to sell for silver or copper that can be saved for emergencies or used to acquire luxuries that make life more pleasant. Better quality linen, cosmetics for the wife, toys for the children, perhaps even a small piece of jewelry that can be passed down as a family heirloom. The years pass in this rhythm, each one similar to the last, each one bringing its own small variations and challenges. Some years the flood is generous and the harvest is abundant, and everyone eats well, and there is money for repairs and improvements. Some years the flood is inadequate and the harvest is poor, and people go hungry and debts accumulate, and anxiety hangs over the village like smoke from a fire that never quite goes out. Some years disease sweeps through, taking the old and the very young, leaving gaps in families that slowly fill or never quite fill, leaving sorrow that gradually dulls but never entirely disappears. The farmer's children grow, learn the work, become skilled in their own right. The oldest son is already capable of managing the plot independently, and the farmer begins to think about dividing the land, about providing for this boy's future family, while still maintaining enough to support the farmer's own old age. The daughter will marry soon, will bring a bride price that will help offset the cost of her upbringing, will go to live with her husband's family and work their fields and bear their children and continue the great chain of human reproduction that is the foundation of all civilization. The farmer grows older. As everyone grows older, the body slowly losing its strength and resilience. The back that was once straight begins to bend. The hands that were once strong begin to tremble slightly. The eyes that could once see a bird at a great distance begin to blur and fade. The farmer accepts these changes with equanimity, understands that this is the natural progression of life, that everyone who lives long enough experiences this gradual decline, that the alternative to aging is death, and death will come soon enough without wishing for it. The farmer begins to think more about the afterlife, about what comes after this body fails, and the soul is released to begin its journey through the underworld. The farmer has been saving money for years, setting aside small amounts to pay for embalming and a proper burial, for the rituals that will help the soul navigate the dangers and tests of the underworld, and reach the hall of judgment where the heart will be weighed against the feather of mad, where truth and righteousness will be assessed, and the soul's fate determined. The farmer hopes to pass this test, believes in having lived a good life, in having worked honestly and raised children and treated neighbors fairly, and honored the gods with regular offerings. The farmer has not been perfect, has sometimes been angry or selfish or thoughtless, but has genuinely tried to live according to the principles of Mad, to maintain balance and order in personal affairs and relationships, to contribute to the community's welfare rather than being a burden or a source of conflict. And if the farmer passes the test, if the heart is found light enough, then comes the reward. Eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise that looks very much like Egypt, but where the harvest never fails, where the Nile always floods at the perfect level, where there is no hunger or pain or fear or death, where the farmer can continue the beloved work of tending crops, but without exhaustion or anxiety, can live forever in the landscape and occupation that defined this earthly existence. The farmer finds deep comfort in this belief, in this promise that death is not the end, but a transformation, that the work and relationships and patterns of this life will continue in some form, that consciousness persists and love endures, and nothing truly valuable is ever lost. Whether this belief is true or merely wishful thinking, the farmer cannot know for certain, but chooses to have faith, chooses to trust in the wisdom of the ancestors and the teachings of the priests and the evidence of the natural world where seeds die in the earth and are reborn as plants, where the sun dies each evening in the west and is reborn each morning in the east, where all of existence seems to follow patterns of death and renewal that suggest continuation rather than termination. One morning, the farmer wakes and knows somehow that this is the last planting season, the last time to walk behind the oxen and guide the plow through the familiar fields. There is no pain, no obvious symptom, just a deep intuitive understanding that time is running out, that the body has perhaps one more cycle left before it fails completely. The farmer says nothing to the wife or children, not wanting to burden them with worry, not wanting to cast a shadow over this final season of work. The planting proceeds as it always has, the same rituals and techniques perfected over a lifetime of practice. The farmer works more slowly now, rests more frequently, but still manages to complete all the necessary tasks, still ensures that the seeds are properly sown and the irrigation channels are properly maintained, and everything is prepared for the growing season that the farmer will see, but perhaps not live to harvest. As the young plants begin to emerge, green shoots pushing up through the black soil toward the sun, the farmer walks through the fields each morning, watching them grow, taking joy in this annual miracle of life emerging from death, of potential becoming actual, of seeds fulfilling their purpose and becoming the plants they were always meant to be. The farmer touches the young shoots gently, almost tenderly, and whispers blessings over them, and feels a profound connection to all the farmers who have ever lived, all the people who have ever coaxed food from the earth and sustained human life through their patient labor and accumulated skill. The crops grow well this year, blessed by good weather and adequate water, and the farmer watches them develop with satisfaction and a touch of sadness, knowing that this beauty will continue after the farmer is gone, that these fields will be tended by the son and grandson and great-grandson in an unbroken line, stretching into a future that the farmer cannot see or imagine. This is immortality of a kind, not personal survival, but the continuation of the work, the persistence of the family and the land, and the ancient partnership between humans and the earth that feeds us. As the harvest season approaches, the farmer grows weaker, spends more time resting, eventually cannot leave the house at all. The son takes over completely now, managing the harvest with skill and confidence, proving that he has learned everything the farmer needed to teach him, that the knowledge has been successfully transmitted, that the chain remains unbroken. The farmer lies on the sleeping mat and listens to the sounds of harvest drifting through the window. Voices calling to each other, the rhythmic swish of sickles cutting grain, oxen lowing as they circle the thrashing floor, children laughing at some private joke. Life continuing in all its busy, purposeful beauty. The wife sits beside the farmer, holding a hand that has become thin and frail, skin like papyrus stretched over bird bones. She says nothing, and the farmer says nothing, but their eyes meet, and everything that needs to be said passes between them without words. Gratitude for the years shared, love that has deepened through decades of working side by side, sorrow at the coming separation, hope that they will meet again in the field of reeds if the gods are merciful and the heart passes judgment. One evening, as the sun sets over the western desert and the sky burns with colors that have no names, the farmer takes a final breath and releases it slowly, gently, like a sigh of contentment, like someone settling into sleep after a long day's work. The soul separates from the body and begins its journey toward the underworld, toward the tests and trials, toward the final judgment, toward whatever comes next for those who have lived and worked and loved and fulfilled their purpose in the great pattern of existence. The family mourns according to custom, with tears and ritual wailing, with prayers and offerings, with the proper ceremonies that honor the dead and ease their passage. The body is embalmed as well as the family can afford, wrapped in linen, placed in a simple wooden coffin painted with protective symbols and prayers. The farmer is buried with a few precious objects: a model plow, a small jar of grain seeds, a cup for water, the tools needed to continue farming in the afterlife. The son performs the opening of the mouth ceremony, speaking the words that will allow the father's soul to eat and drink and breathe in the world beyond death. The family places offerings of bread and beer at the tomb, food for the journey through the underworld, sustenance for the soul, until it reaches the paradise where such things are no longer needed because everything is provided in endless abundance. Life continues in the village, in the fields, along the Nile. The son farms the land that was his father's, teaches his own children the skills he learned, tells them stories about their grandfather, who was a good farmer and a good man who lived according to Mad, and who now dwells in the field of reeds where the harvest never fails. The grandson will inherit the land in turn, and his children after him, on and on through generations that stretch toward a future that none of them can imagine. A future where Egypt will rise and fall and rise again, where empires will come and go, where the world will be transformed beyond recognition. But the fields remain, and the Nile still flows, and people still plant seeds and tend crops and harvest grain and make bread and feed their families, still perform the ancient work that connects the present to the past and the past to the unimaginable future. The farmer's life was ordinary in most ways, distinguished by no great achievements or dramatic events. But it was also extraordinary in its faithfulness, in its daily devotion to the work that matters, in its quiet heroism of showing up day after day to do what needs doing regardless of how one feels, regardless of circumstances, regardless of whether anyone notices or appreciates the effort. This is the backbone of civilization. These ordinary people doing necessary work with skill and patience and devotion. The pharaohs and priests and nobles get the attention of history, their names carved in stone and remembered for thousands of years. But it is the farmers who make everything else possible, who produce the surplus that allows some people to specialize in other pursuits, who literally feed the civilization that builds pyramids and temples and develops art and philosophy and all the other things we admire when we look back at ancient Egypt. The farmer understood this implicitly, understood that the work was important even if it was not celebrated, understood that feeding people is sacred work, because without food there is nothing. No art, no learning, no civilization, no human flourishing of any kind. The farmer took pride in this work, found meaning in it, lived a life that was both humble and profound, both ordinary and essential, both temporary and somehow eternal through its participation in patterns that have sustained humanity since we first learned to plant seeds instead of simply gathering what nature provided. And now the fields beside the Nile and the mud brick houses and the patient oxen begin to dim behind your thoughts, fading like mist under the morning sun. We've drifted through 100 quiet truths of the farmer's world. The pre-dawn waking when stars still filled the sky and coolness was a gift to be savored before the day's heat arrived. The simple prayers to Ra and Happy and Osiris, who make farming possible. The breakfast of bread and beer and raw onions eaten quickly before walking to the fields. We felt the texture of rich black silt between our fingers, smelled the distinctive scent of the Nile, that means life and possibility. Watched the green shoots emerge from planted seeds in the eternal miracle of growth and transformation. We've worked alongside the farmer managing irrigation channels, repairing mud walls, weeding between crop rows, checking constantly for problems that could threaten the harvest. We've experienced the rhythm of the 3 seasons. Akhet when the flood comes and farmers work on state projects. Peret when seeds are planted and crops are tended. Shemu when everything is harvested in a burst of intensive labor. We've shared meals in the shade during midday heat, bread and lentils, and occasionally fish from the canal, simple food that sustained bodies doing hard physical work. We've witnessed the anxiety of the tax assessment, the relief when enough grain remains after the state takes its portion, the satisfaction of storing surplus in sealed jars against future needs. We've watched children learn the ancient skills, knowledge passing from generation to generation in an unbroken chain stretching backward and forward through time. We felt the farmer aging, the body slowly weakening, the deep comfort of knowing the work will continue after death, that the land will be tended and the family will persist, and nothing truly valuable is ever lost. We've understood that ordinary work done with devotion is sacred work, that feeding people is holy labor, that civilization rests on the shoulders of those who grow food and tend the earth with patience and skill. You are a part of this history, not just a listener, but a participant in humanity's long relationship with agriculture, with the land that feeds us, with the plants we've cultivated, and the animals we've domesticated, and the skills we've refined over thousands of years of practice and observation and accumulated wisdom. Every time you eat, you are connected to these ancient farmers, to their labor and their knowledge, and their devotion to the work of transforming seeds into food, potential into actuality, emptiness into fullness. The patience they practiced lives in you when you wait for results rather than demanding instant gratification. Their understanding of cycles and seasons lives in you when you recognize that life has rhythms that cannot be rushed or controlled, only observed and honored. Their acceptance of hardship lives in you when you persevere through difficulties without losing hope or abandoning your purpose. You carry these ancient patterns within you, inheritance from ancestors who lived along rivers and in valleys and on plains all over the world, who learned to farm and thereby created the stability and surplus that allowed civilization to develop and humanity to flourish. Tonight, as you rest, the ancient Egyptian fields turn on beside the Nile in that distant time. The farmer is waking before dawn, stepping into the cool pre-dawn darkness, breathing deeply the air that smells of river and growing things. The stars are fading as the sky lightens in the east. Prayer is offered to the gods who make everything possible. Simple bread and beer provide energy for the coming day. The walk to the fields begins along familiar paths through the waking village. The irrigation channels are checked and adjusted, water flowing steadily toward thirsty crops. The barley stands golden and tall, nearly ready for harvest. Emmer wheat grows green and strong in adjacent plots. Flax flowers bloom blue like fallen pieces of sky. The sun breaks over the eastern desert in sudden golden glory. The farmer's family arrives to share the work. Wife weeding between the rows, son managing the oxen, daughter scaring birds away from ripening grain. The midday meal is taken in the shade, bread and onions and lentils, rest and conversation, and the gathering of strength. The afternoon work continues until the sun descends in the west and light turns soft and golden. The walk home is tired but satisfied, aching muscles testimony to honest labor completed. The evening meal is prepared over the cooking fire, fish grilled crispy and delicious. Stories are told to children who listen with wide eyes, learning what it means to be Egyptian, to be human, to be part of the great chain of being. The stars emerge in their thousands, brilliant and eternal. Sleep comes easily to those who work hard with their bodies. And somewhere in the field of reeds, if the ancient beliefs are true, all the farmers who ever lived continue their beloved work in paradise, where the harvest never fails, and the work is pure joy, without exhaustion or anxiety or fear. The routines are unfolding across 3,000 years of history. Light is fading from our view, but blazing eternally in those ancient fields. Silent, devoted labor continues beneath countless suns, and you are floating within it all, a small warmth in the vast agricultural past, resting in the tapestry of quiet human stories that made civilization possible, that transformed wild grasses into wheat and barley, that learned through patient observation how to work with the Nile's rhythms rather than against them, that created the surplus that allowed Egypt to become one of history's greatest civilizations. Sleep well now, dear traveler. Let the farmer's patience become your patience. Let their rhythm become your rhythm. Let the sound of water flowing through irrigation channels become the sound of your own breath, steady and eternal. Let the image of green shoots emerging from black soil become the last thing you see before dreams take you completely. Let the knowledge that this work continues somewhere, somehow, in the eternal present of the past, comfort you as you drift deeper and deeper into the soft darkness where all stories end and all rest begins. If you happen to still be awake, you can go ahead and watch the next chapter now. Good night, and may your dreams be as fertile as the black land of Egypt, as abundant as a good harvest, as peaceful as the evening beside the Nile when the day's work is done, and the stars begin their vigil overhead. But before we leave the farmer's world completely, let us linger a moment longer in those fields. Let us understand more deeply the tools and techniques that made this life possible, the innovations that seem simple to us now, but that represented breakthroughs of tremendous importance when they were first developed. The plow, that fundamental tool of agriculture, existed in ancient Egypt in several forms. The simplest was the hand plow, operated entirely by human strength, a wooden handle attached to wooden blades tipped with bronze to give them strength and sharpness. The farmer would grip this handle and push the plow forward through the soil, using body weight and muscle to drive the blades into the earth, turning it, aerating it, preparing it to receive seeds. This was exhausting work, requiring tremendous physical effort, and the farmer's bent posture during this labor contributed to the back problems that plagued agricultural workers throughout history. More fortunate farmers, those with access to draft animals, used ox-drawn plows that came in 2 gauges. Heavy plows that cut the initial furrows, breaking through compacted soil, and lighter plows that followed behind, turning up the earth and creating the final seedbed. The oxen were yoked with wooden harnesses, guided by voice commands, and sometimes by gentle taps with a stick, walking in straight lines across the field while the farmer walked behind, steadying the plow, adjusting its depth, ensuring the work was done properly. The hoe was perhaps the most versatile tool in the farmer's arsenal, used for breaking up clods of earth, for weeding between crop rows, for creating small irrigation channels, for countless tasks that required breaking or moving soil. The ancient Egyptian hoe typically had a wooden handle and blade bound together with rope, positioned at an acute angle that made the tool resemble the letter A. The blade might be wood or bronze, depending on the farmer's wealth, and the binding had to be checked and repaired regularly, because the constant stress of use would loosen and eventually break it. The sickle, used during harvest, was one of the oldest agricultural tools, its crescent shape perfectly designed for the cutting motion required to harvest grain. In ancient Egypt, sickle blades were made of wood rather than iron, and the wood was glazed and then carefully honed to create an edge sharp enough to cut through grain stalks efficiently. The farmer would grip a bunch of stalks in one hand and swing the sickle with the other, cutting through the stalks about halfway up and leaving the stubble standing in the field to be plowed under later. After harvest came threshing, the process of separating grain from straw, and this was accomplished by spreading the harvested crop on a hard-packed thrashing floor and driving animals, usually donkeys, round and round over it, until their hooves had trampled the grain heads and broken them open. Then came winnowing, done with wooden pitchforks or forks that women used to toss the mixture of grain and chaff into the air, letting the wind blow away the lighter chaff while the heavier grain fell back to the ground. The final separation was done with sieves made from reeds and palm leaves woven into screens fine enough to catch chaff, but coarse enough to let grain pass through. This was patient work, requiring repetition and attention, but it was necessary to produce clean grain suitable for storage and milling. Perhaps the most ingenious tool was the shaduf, a lever-and counterweight system used for irrigation that is still employed in some parts of Egypt and India today. The shaduf consisted of a long pole balanced on a fulcrum, with a bucket attached to one end and a heavy weight attached to the other. The farmer would pull down on the bucket end, lowering it into the canal or river, then allow the counterweight to lift the filled bucket up. Then swing the pole to pour the water into an irrigation channel or directly onto the field. This simple machine multiplied human effort, allowing one person to move large amounts of water with relatively little expenditure of energy. The shaduf made it possible to irrigate fields that were higher than the water level, extending cultivation beyond the areas that could be reached by simple ditches and canals. The rhythmic motion of operating a shaduf pull down, let up, swing around, pour, repeat, was meditative in its way. Another of the many repetitive tasks that filled the farmer's days, and that induced a kind of trance state where the mind could wander while the body performed its practiced movements. Basin irrigation was another crucial technique, involving the construction of earth embankments to form basins that could be flooded with Nile water during the inundation. These basins would hold the water for several weeks, allowing it to soak deeply into the soil and deposit its load of fertile silt. Then, the water would be drained back into the river, and the saturated fields would be ready for plowing and planting. This system required careful planning and coordination, as the basins had to be arranged to take advantage of the land's natural slope, and the embankments had to be maintained constantly to prevent breaches that would flood areas unintentionally or leave others too dry. The management of irrigation was so important that provincial officials were held responsible for water regulation, and conflicts over water rights were among the most common sources of legal disputes. A farmer whose upstream neighbor diverted too much water might find his own crops dying of thirst, and such disputes had to be resolved by local officials who understood the irrigation system and could enforce fair distribution. All of these tools and techniques were developed over centuries of trial and error, of observation and innovation, of farmers experimenting and discovering what worked and what didn't, of knowledge being accumulated and refined and passed down through generations until it became the established wisdom that everyone took for granted. The farmer we have been following throughout this long night was the inheritor of all this accumulated knowledge, standing at the end of a chain of learning that stretched back to the very beginning of Egyptian agriculture in pre-dynastic times. And that farmer, in turn, passed this knowledge forward to children and students, adding small innovations and insights gained through personal experience, contributing to the ongoing evolution of agricultural practice that would continue for thousands of years. This is how human knowledge grows, not through dramatic breakthroughs alone, but through the patient accumulation of small improvements, through countless individuals, each adding their tiny contribution to the great edifice of understanding that allows civilization to function and flourish. The farmer's life was hard, no question about that. The physical labor was demanding, the hours were long, the rewards were modest, and the risks were ever present. A bad flood could mean famine. A good flood could be followed by a poor flood. Disease could strike crops or animals or people without warning. Accidents could leave someone unable to work and therefore unable to eat. The state's demands for taxes and labor could feel crushing, especially in difficult years. But there were also deep satisfactions that people in more complex occupations might never experience. The direct connection between effort and result. You plant seeds and you get food. You work hard and you survive. You care for the land and it cares for you in return. The rhythm of the seasons providing structure and predictability to life, each year following the same pattern, the same cycle of flood and planting and growth and harvest, comforting in its reliability. The close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else and worked together toward common goals, sharing labor during busy times, helping each other during emergencies, celebrating together during festivals. The farmer knew every inch of the family's plot, knew its moods and characteristics as intimately as knowing a person's personality, knew where water tended to pool and where it drained away too quickly, knew which areas produced the best grain and which were less productive, knew where mice nested and where birds preferred to feed, knew the smell of the soil in each season, the feel of it between the fingers, the way it changed from wet and sticky during inundation to dry and powdery during harvest. This intimate knowledge of place is something that many modern people have lost. Our lives taking place in multiple locations, our attention scattered across vast distances through technology and travel, and the mobility that characterizes contemporary existence. But for the ancient Egyptian farmer, life was rooted in one place, in these specific fields beside this specific section of the Nile. And there was a deep satisfaction in this rootedness, this sense of belonging to a place, and having that place belong to you in return. The farmer watched the Nile every day, knew its moods and levels, could read in its color and speed, and smell what kind of year it was going to be. A strong flood that came early and rose high meant abundant crops and prosperity for everyone. A weak flood meant a difficult year ahead, careful rationing, anxiety about whether stored grain would last until the next harvest. An excessively strong flood could be almost as bad as a weak one, destroying embankments and houses, drowning animals, requiring massive reconstruction efforts. The farmer lived with this uncertainty, this dependence on forces beyond human control, and it bred a particular kind of character. Patient, stoic, deeply religious, understanding that human plans and efforts can be undone by circumstances that must simply be accepted and adapted to. This is very different from the modern sensibility that believes we should be able to control our circumstances, that sees setbacks as failures rather than as inevitable parts of existence, that has difficulty accepting limitation and uncertainty. The ancient Egyptian farmer had no such illusions about control. The The farmer knew that humans are small and the forces of nature are vast, that the gods decide ultimate outcomes, that all we can do is work hard and pray sincerely and hope that our efforts will be blessed. This understanding bred a kind of humility that could be confused with passivity, but was actually wisdom, the deep wisdom of knowing your place in the cosmos, of understanding what you can influence and what you must simply accept. The farmer's spirituality was not abstract or philosophical, but immediate and practical. The gods were real presences who affected daily life in tangible ways. Ra brought the sun that made crops grow. Hapi brought the flood that renewed the soil. Osiris taught humans how to farm and promised resurrection after death. Isis protected families and healed the sick. These were not distant theological concepts, but intimate companions, forces that were as real as the soil and the water and the grain. Prayer was not a weekly obligation, but a daily practice, woven into the fabric of ordinary life. Prayers upon waking, prayers before meals, prayers when planting, prayers when harvesting, prayers when problems arose, prayers of gratitude when things went well. Small offerings left at household shrines and local temples, bread and beer and flowers, and whatever else could be spared, gifts to the gods who made everything possible. The farmer believed firmly in Mad, the principle of cosmic order and justice that was supposed to govern all things. Mad meant living in balance, treating others fairly, working honestly, honoring the gods, accepting your place in the social hierarchy, maintaining the traditions that had been passed down, contributing to the community's welfare. To live according to Mad was to live rightly, and those who lived rightly would be rewarded in this life with success and respect, and in the afterlife with eternal existence in paradise. This belief system provided tremendous comfort and motivation. It meant that life had meaning and purpose, that your actions mattered, that justice would ultimately prevail even if it didn't always seem to in the short term. It meant that hardship and suffering were not meaningless, but were tests or punishments, or simply the natural fluctuations of existence that everyone experienced, and that if you persevered with integrity, you would be rewarded. The farmer's relationship with death was very different from the modern Western attitude. Death was not something to be feared or avoided or hidden away, but an expected and accepted part of life, something everyone must face, the great transition from earthly existence to whatever comes next. The farmer prepared for death throughout life, setting aside resources for proper burial, trying to live in such a way that the heart would be light when weighed in judgment, maintaining relationships with family who would perform the necessary funeral rituals. The tomb was understood as a house for eternity, furnished with the things needed for ongoing existence: food and drink, furniture and tools, images of daily life painted on the walls, so that if the actual offerings failed, the painted versions could sustain the deceased through magic. The farmer's tomb would be modest compared to the elaborate constructions of the wealthy. but it would contain the essentials. A place for offerings, prayers for protection and sustenance. The farmer's name inscribed so that identity would persist. Some representation of the work that defined this life. The afterlife was imagined as a continuation and idealization of earthly life, not as something radically different. In the field of reeds, the blessed dead would farm perfect fields that produced abundant crops without exhausting labor, would feast without hunger ever returning, would be with loved ones without fear of separation, would exist forever in the prime of life without aging or sickness or decay. This vision of paradise was not about escaping from earthly existence, but about experiencing it in its most perfect form, freed from all the limitations and sufferings that make mortal life difficult. This is a very different conception from religions that imagine the afterlife as completely separate from earthly existence, as a realm of pure spirit where physical pleasures and activities are left behind. The ancient Egyptian vision was more earthy, more embodied, more continuous with the life they actually lived. The farmer wanted to continue farming in the afterlife because farming was good work, meaningful work, sacred work. The problem wasn't the work itself, but the suffering and uncertainty and mortality that accompanied it in earthly existence. And so the farmer lived and worked and died, and the son took over the land, and his children after him, on and on through generations and centuries. Individual farmers were forgotten, their names lost, their specific stories dissolved into the great collective story of ancient Egyptian agriculture that sustained one of history's most impressive civilizations for 3,000 years. We remember the pharaohs and the pyramids, the scribes and the priests, but we forget the farmers who made it all possible, who produced the surplus that allowed specialization, who fed the stone cutters and the artists and the officials, and everyone else who didn't grow their own food. Without farmers, there would have been no ancient Egypt as we know it, no monuments, no literature, no art, no philosophy, nothing but scattered villages of subsistence cultivators with no surplus to support civilization's elaborate superstructure. The farmers were the foundation, the essential base on which everything else was built. And though we don't know their names or their individual stories, we can honor them by recognizing their crucial importance, by understanding that civilization is not just the work of kings and geniuses, but of countless ordinary people doing necessary work with skill and dedication day after day after day. The ancient Egyptian farmer's legacy lives on in ways both obvious and subtle. The wheat and barley they cultivated are ancestors of grains we still eat today. The agricultural techniques they developed influenced farming practices throughout the Mediterranean and Near East. The shaduf they invented is still used in some places. The basic tools they employed, plow, hoe, sickle, remain fundamental to agriculture, even in the age of mechanization. But perhaps more importantly, They demonstrated that humans could transform their environment through patient observation and accumulated knowledge, that we could move beyond hunting and gathering to active cultivation, that we could create reliable food supplies that would support larger populations and more complex social organizations. Agriculture was one of humanity's greatest innovations, perhaps the greatest, and the ancient Egyptian farmers were among its most successful practitioners. Their 3,000-year run of agricultural success in the Nile Valley stands as testimony to the effectiveness of their methods and the wisdom of their approach. They worked with nature rather than against it, understanding the river's rhythms and adapting their activities accordingly. They maintained soil fertility through careful management and the river's annual gift of silt. They diversified their crops to spread risk and ensure nutrition. They developed tools appropriate to their circumstances and continuously refined their techniques based on experience. This is sustainability in action. Long before the word existed, long before people worried consciously about exhausting resources or destroying ecosystems. The ancient Egyptian farmers knew intuitively that if you take care of the land, it will take care of you. That short-term thinking leads to long-term disaster. That the goal is not maximum extraction, but sustainable abundance over generations and centuries. Modern industrial agriculture could learn from this ancient wisdom, from this understanding that soil is not an inert medium, but a living system that must be nurtured, that water is precious and must be managed carefully, that diversity is strength and monoculture is vulnerability, that the goal should be resilience rather than maximum short-term yield. But that is a conversation for another time, another story. Tonight, we have been with the ancient farmer, have lived their daily rhythm, have understood something of their worldview and their practices, have recognized their essential humanity and their crucial importance to the civilization they supported through their labor. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you the image of those green fields beside the Nile, the patient farmer walking behind the ox-drawn plow, the wife weeding between crop rows, the children scaring birds, and learning the skills they'll need for their own adult lives. Carry the sound of water flowing through irrigation channels, the smell of rich soil after the flood, the taste of fresh bread made from grain you grew yourself. Carry the satisfaction of hard work completed, of seeds planted that will become food, of a life lived in rhythm with natural cycles, of being part of a community that depends on you and that you depend on in return. Carry the peace that comes from knowing your place and your purpose, from doing work that matters, from contributing to something larger than yourself. Let the farmer's patience become your patience, their acceptance your acceptance, their faith your faith, their connection to earth and water and growing things your connection to. Even if you live in a city far from any farm, even if your food comes from supermarkets and your water from taps, even if you've never planted a seed or harvested grain or felt soil between your fingers, because we are all descended from farmers, all carrying in our genes the memories of ancestors who lived this life, who did this work, who made it possible for us to be here now. We are all connected to the land that feeds us, even when that connection is invisible, mediated by complex supply chains and global commerce and technologies our ancestors couldn't imagine. The ancient Egyptian farmer reminds us of this connection, calls us back to the fundamental reality that we are embodied creatures who need food and water and shelter, who are part of nature even when we pretend to be separate from it, who depend utterly on the earth's generosity, even when we take that generosity for granted. Sleep now and dream of fields and rivers, of planting and harvesting, of the eternal cycle of growth and decay and renewal that sustains all life. Dream of being part of something larger than yourself, something ancient and continuing, something that connects you to all humans who ever lived and all who will live in futures we cannot imagine. Dream of the farmer walking home at sunset, tired but satisfied, ready for the evening meal and the family's company, and the rest that prepares body and mind for tomorrow's labor. Dream of waking before dawn to begin again, to continue the work that never ends, but that brings its own deep rewards, that needs no justification beyond itself. That is simply what humans do, what we have always done, what we will continue doing as long as our species survives. Good night, dear dreamer. May your sleep be as deep as the Nile's black soil, as refreshing as its cool water, as peaceful as the evening beside the river when the day's work is done.